We are truly thrilled to have you all here this evening with us to celebrate the opening of Walter Price's Pearl Lines, moving fluidly between abstraction and representation. Price creates inner worlds at the edge of visibility and is known for his expansive paintings comprised of fluid marks and lush, vivid color. We hope you've seen the paintings. There will be time after the talk this evening to see the work if you haven't. But the work often features domestic and psychological objects, including brick walls, sofas, portable computers, among other things you might recognize emerging from the paint. The exhibition that opens today provides a window into Walter's evolving practice and features over 20 special and spectacular paintings, including never-before-seen canvases. We are truly so excited to have you here in conversation with Rosario Güiraldes, who is the curator of the exhibition. I told her I was going to nail that roll dar. It is my great pleasure to acknowledge the many generous supporters of this exhibition: the Edward R. Bazinet Charitable Foundation, Walker trustee John Christakos and his wife Deborah, Martin and Rebecca Eisenberg, Shelley and Neil Mitchell, and Jay Petashek and Karen Elizaga. Additional support is provided by Myung Lee and Neil Simpkins, Richard Mumby, Angela Nazarian, Robert and Daryl Offer, and Mark and Anna Claire Salamacado. Following the talk, we invite you to join us in Cargill Lounge for drinks and bites from exceptional chefs Gustavo and Kate Romero of Nixta by Oro. You can grab a bite and see the show. But now for the main event, please welcome to the stage Rosario and Walter.
Okay, hi everyone. Good night, good evening. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here today. It's an honor to be here with Walter, celebrating the opening of his major institutional show today, his first exhibition in the Midwest. This is also my first exhibition at the Walker Art Center. I moved to Minneapolis a little over a year ago. It's my first time on this stage too. But I wanted to also begin by echoing Amanda's words and just thank all the lenders and funders, and especially those present today. Deborah and John Christakos, Jay Petashek, and Mark and Anna Claire Salamacaro, Carol Green and her exceptional team, including Jeffrey Rolich and Sam Agnew, are here with us, and their support has also really been invaluable. Walter and I are on the stage here right now, but a lot of people really make our exhibitions possible, and I want to thank everyone who helped make this exhibition possible, beginning by Brandon Eng, who's here with us too, Keela Nordlund, our crew, our front desk staff, everyone, our techs, making sure that our slides run seamlessly. Thank you all for being here. And so I'm gonna just first, perhaps give you a bit of a sense of what's gonna happen tonight. We're gonna be talking for about 45 minutes, and we organized a slideshow. I decided to kind of identify key thematics in Walter's work and kind of group images of his artworks in the show and of previous shows in relationship to those key thematics as a way to access Walter's practice. And then we're leaving 15 minutes for Q&A, so you can think of your questions as we're talking and ask them at the end. But I wanted to begin by introducing, Walter and I have known each other for about 6 years. I spent the past 6 years working at the Drawing Center, an institution in New York, a small nonprofit dedicated to drawing. And so I obsessively thought about drawing for 6 years. That's all I thought and slept and breathed. My whole life was about drawing. And I was tasked with this sort of assignment to organize a contemporary group exhibition in 2022. And I remember Walter and I met in the context of that exhibition that I was planning in early stages. And I was really interested in this idea of thinking of drawing as like the underdog medium. Like there's this sort of like success mediums, painting and sculpture, and thinking of drawing as this sort of like middle child underdog, this sort of like space where like artists have a possibility to create more freely without perhaps like the burden of a sort of like masterpiece. And I remember walking into Walter's studio for the first time, and there were drawings everywhere. There was a lot of work everywhere, on the floor, on the walls. Every surface, every inch was covered in drawings and paintings. And at some point, I don't know how we arrived to this moment of like, I think I was asking you about like creative blocks and like inspiration, and Walter, who has this kind of like incredibly infectious way of talking about his work, was like, what do you mean being like bored or blocked? Like, I'm an artist. Like, this is what I do for life. There's no way that could ever happen. And there was something about that answer that was perhaps like, there was something disarming that situated me in who he is as an artist and how he approaches his work. And that was the beginning of a dialogue that we've maintained since then. So I just wanted to first begin by perhaps giving you an opportunity, Walter, to respond to what happened there.
All right. Yeah, so that was a very great moment. I always wanted to be a part of the Drawing Center. I was kind of hoping that they would give me a solo show way before I was ready, or be in a collection or anything. So when you came to my studio and offered me, you know, an opportunity to be in the show, I was very honored, and it was a very special moment for me because at that time I held drawing to such a high regard, and I was very preachy about it, and I was trying to like get everyone to believe that it was much more important than what is. It's not just a sketch for a painting. So I had this very intense perspective about drawing. So when you came to my studio and, you know, offered me the opportunity, I was so grateful and just like very happy that knowing that now this is my opportunity to be in the Drawing Center. And what you helped me with that was very important was, after like listening to me ramble on and on, you kind of realize that a lot of my drawings were very small, and I kind of packed a lot into the small drawings, but then the larger drawings were, I kind of played more with space. So in a way I was being more timid with the larger drawings, and you kind of just said this thing of like, you see what you're doing in your smaller drawings, maybe you should consider doing that in your larger drawings. And I was like, whoa, you know. You know, I thought I had it all figured out, and I thought I thought I just knew everything, but I realized like, man, I really am being intimidated by making larger drawings. I'm like saying this thing of giving my drawings, the larger drawings, more space, but it really was, I wasn't filling in the space. I wasn't putting all the energy into it. So that day when she left, I was like, man, I'm gonna do a big drawing. And I was like, I'm gonna finish one today, and because I know if I send this to her, it's gonna be impressive. So I really went hard, and I remember my hands were cramping, and I was like, I kind of thought to myself like, well, this is probably why I don't really make big drawings. But so yeah, I was, you know, put all that energy into making a large drawing and then sent it to her, and she gave me such a good response. And you kind of like gave me a little breakthrough with how I was approaching everything. I was kind of getting too comfortable in my own little world, making smaller works. I was getting too committed to the smaller works. So you kind of opened me up and made me realize that although I felt like I had it figured out or was very confident, I still needed to, you know, push and challenge myself. So that kind of always would be like a important moment for my career.
Thank you. But that's really like the gist of like what we hope when we're doing an exhibition and a group exhibition is that you will meet artists along the way that will engage with your ideas and help you work through your own thinking and vice versa. And I think that I've really valued that since we met each other. So I just wanted to kind of like go through some of those drawings that Walter made at that time.
That's my favorite right there. It still made me giggle.
And And so since the beginning of our kind of dialogue and friendship and started with drawing, it's also the origin of your work. And you tend to like refer, like you've said before, that everything starts with line. And so I really wanted to open up this dialogue with drawing because it's also the beginning of our dialogues. And always like emphasizing that like really like fundamental place that it occupies in your practice. And your approach to drawing is free, it's adventurous. You use like different kinds of materials. There's a Post-it sticker here, some tape, markers, pencil. And so I just wanted to perhaps like spend a little bit of time talking about line and drawing and their importance in your practice, like how you think about line conceptually. We've spoken about this idea of like engaging, like letting the eyes like move through a canvas, through a drawing.
Yeah, so drawing for me is the foundation to my practice. I think even when you're thinking about making paintings in the beginning, you're kind of making sketches and coloring it in. So in a way, that's very important. Drawing is important. The line is important. It's like this blueprint for a painting a lot of times, or it gives it like structure. But for me, it's also like a freedom to explore. And I remember when I first got to New York, everyone was very like intimidating about painting and stuff, and they were making really big paintings. And I had a small studio, I was like making work out of my apartment. So I could not even possibly think about making large work. So I was invited to like a drawing party, and in the party, I remember like everyone was nice. It wasn't like this competition or anything. We was like trading drawings, and everyone was drawing, and it just reminded me of like childhood and how kids would interact when you give them a lot of like coloring pencils and tools and stuff to go at it. So it just kind of helped me to embrace like drawing and appreciate drawing much more. And for my painting practice, drawing allows me to kind of be a bit more fearless with even color, line, and shape. So yeah, it's making drawings is nothing to be really worried about. People are not as critical about it. So you can explore, you can experiment, and I think being an artist is important to dive out there in that way. And I think drawing really gives that to you, because even when you think about a painting or canvas and all this material and how much it costs, no matter who you are, it kind of mentally bothers you, intimidates you. And this idea of masterpiece is very intimidating. So with a drawing, it's none of that. And I like to approach it in that way and take it more seriously, or to create it, or to not have it as just a sketch for my painting, but as like another body of work and an important part of my practice. So yeah, I really felt like it was important to emphasize drawing, or to continue to emphasize drawing in my practice.
So I want to perhaps backtrack a moment. We're going to talk a little bit about your journey to art, from your childhood in Macon, Georgia, to seeing this particular show of Henry Taylor at Blum & Poe in LA in 2013. But perhaps you can describe a bit of like that journey, your first sort of like steps with art making, your art classes during high school.
Right. So I'm the youngest of four, so I've always kind of been like the little weirdo, and I would always like doodle in class. I was kind of like the guy that I was smart, but I was like a class clown at the same time. So I would finish my work fast and then kind of distract other students. So doodling kind of became this thing that just helped my imagination or something. So I kind of gravitated to it a lot more. And then in schools, I became like the artist, the guy, and it kind of became a part of my identity. So I really started to commit to it. And my family, they're more into music and other things, so they were not really so into art like that, but they never discouraged me. They never told me what I was doing was silly or I shouldn't do it, because that's all it would have took if they would have said, if my mom would have just said like, what are you doing, man? I probably would not have committed, but because she didn't do that, it allowed me to push forward. So I kind of decided early on I wanted to be an artist, but it started first with wanting to be a cartoonist. So I would make these little these little panels and comic strips and send them to these syndications and hopefully they thinking they would hire me or publish my comics. But of course, I never got a letter back or anything. So I started with that, and then the more I learned about cartooning, I realized like I didn't want to work in that way. So it like transitioned, and then I started learning more about fine art, and I realized like I think I would want to be that. So in high school, I was very ambitious. I did like I was taking like AP classes in art, and I created like 2 or 3 portfolios. One was like distortion, one was like landscape. But my art teachers never really took me seriously like that. They never like told me like about going to art school or anything. So I kind of figured it out through talking to the other students that she would talk to about going to art school. So I looked into it on my own because also my mom couldn't help me because she was old school, so she kind of didn't really know. So when I looked into it on my own, I realized like, man, I can't afford this. It's so expensive. And then I learned that I would always come home every day at like maybe my junior and senior year, thinking like, what am I gonna do next? And I watched a lot of SportsCenter and SpongeBob all the time, and it was the Navy commercial will always come on. So it was like every day for like those 2 years, last 2 years of high school, seeing this Navy commercial, and he's like, join the Navy. You see the little the speedboat come out the back. They got the equipment on. It looked very cool. And I thought to myself, like, that's probably the only way I'm gonna be able to go to art school is commit to going to the military because they pay for your education. So I kind of decided to commit to that, and that kind of helped me get into school, and they paid for my schooling. And throughout my Navy career, I started a clothing line because while we were on the ship, naively before I got to the Navy, I thought that I would be able to make a painting portfolio while I was on the ship. Yeah, I was out there for sure. But when I got there, I realized no way that's happening. So I would do Sharpies on T-shirts because in the military, it's all about a clean white T-shirt. So we had tons of white T-shirts. So I started drawing images on T-shirts, and I created a T-shirt company called Deep in My Dreams Clothing. And I was just trying to keep my creative practice alive in a way. And I remember getting out, going to school in Georgia. And on the spring break, I traveled to LA because I was starting to realize that to be a contemporary artist, I needed to go to either LA or New York, or that's what I told myself. It seemed like that's how I was. So I visited LA, and I was seeing like, how could I live here? What would it be like? And I realized like I would have to drive, and I had to bring my cars and all this stuff. Or it would be a lot of money. But I walked into this show. But like as I was realizing like I can't live in LA, I seen Henry Taylor's show, and just walking into this show, although he's talking more about slavery, race, and some heavy things. When I walked into this show and seeing that dirt pile, I just for some reason was just thinking about the South and home, and it felt so cool to me, and that he kind of transformed this world. And then seeing the chandeliers and the table, it kind of blew me away because before that I always just thought about art as like paintings on the wall. So seeing like this installation, and then looking at his paintings, how large they were, and looking at them up close to see so much energy and how he paint, and the confidence to leave things like what some would say is unfinished, but I just knew that was confidence that he was done. He's the artist. So the energy of Henry Taylor and who he is as a person was in his paintings, and it exuded to me. And I was like, I gotta go for this. This guy, I was just overwhelmed by like how it felt being in his show. And I was like, I gotta do this. But I knew I had to do it in New York, not LA.
So fast forward 5 years, your first institutional solo show at MoMA PS1, which we've talked about. It was a really important moment, a moment that opened lots of doors for you. And so I think that, and we've talked about this too, like the sort of like experience that you had of, it's like being profoundly inspired by seeing Henry Taylor. Like this is something that you've carried to your shows, like every show that you do. Like your audience is so important. the audience thinking of like fellow artists, fellow painters, and like wanting to inspire other artists in the same way that you did. But perhaps we can continue by talking a little bit about this exhibition and particularly this body of work. Like, what were you doing at the time? What led you to the series, of which there's 3 paintings in our exhibition?
Right. So as I was starting to get like some attention with like being a painter in New York, I got offered a residency at the Guild Hall that's in like East Hampton. It's in the Hamptons. And I started to realize, like, as I was, they were talking to me and things, I started to realize that it was this expectation of paintings from me. So I guess because I was in the Navy and being told what to do all the time, I kind of get a little rebellious to what people expect of me. So when I realized like they wanted me to be in a residency because they liked my paintings and it's kind of expected of me to paint, I decided I would do mostly drawings and I would try to just fill as many sketchbooks as I can and also suppress that urge, because although I was making this decision, I knew I really wanted to make paintings because I'm so obsessed with painting. So I knew it would be hard, but I was like, I'm not going to give them what they want, type of thing. So I was drawing a lot, and then when I got out of when the residency was done, I came back to my studio, and it was this feeling of like, man, I want to paint so much. Oh my God, I gotta paint. But I was normally making small paintings, and I realized like, man, that's too much. I got too much energy for that small scale. I gotta scale up. But I didn't want to scale up my smaller works. I didn't want to just look like what I felt like, again, what's expected of you, or the easy way. So I thought about how, okay, I'll make larger works, larger bodies of work, but how to approach it. And at the same time, and I heard about this female athlete, actually Serena Williams was getting like scrutinized because I guess some reporter or something said she looked like a man. And then it made me think about, question my own masculinity and my own like sense of misogyny. And because I am a mama's boy, I thought like it is weird how, man, we love our mom, but we can be so intimidated by powerful women. So as a way to say sorry to her, I kind of wanted to make like these paintings that are kind of from the idea of sports trophies and the implied movement of it. And I start painting them from the bottom up to kind of create that awkwardness and kind of push more toward abstraction. So these works for me kind of rose out of like this, what was happening at the time, or what led me to think about questioning myself and being a man and how weird we can be about things, and how to make a larger body of work. So it was like an easier entry into making these works. So I literally made them in a very small studio on the floor, and I had a studio visit, and I think people were really taken aback by it, and they decided to give me a show. That part happened very fast, like them offering me this show. It felt like, it happened so fast. The basis of it was sports trophies. Even though they don't look like sports trophies, it was like the concept, so yeah.
So we're moving to figuration and abstraction, and the blurring of the lines, and your work is incredibly open-ended. History, contemporary events, personal experiences, they all offer points of departure that are never kind of like settled into a single cohesive narrative. But I wanted you to speak to this approach, like this idea of making figuration exciting, or advancing into abstraction to the figure, and how you think about figuration in relationship to the viewers of your works.
Right. So in the beginning, I was more into like comics, illustration, and it took me a while to realize like how to like loosen up or relax in a way. I remember my partner Rachel telling me I was trying too hard. So it took me a while to realize like how should I approach like feeling like I had strength in doing figuration, but knowing that I was trying to illustrate too much. So I decided to prioritize abstraction and like mark making over figuration. So a lot of times when I'm making these works, I'm thinking more about the mark making and the moments, certain moments in the painting rather than the whole idea of it. So it's kind of giving more credit to abstraction, but it's like using abstraction and mark making as a way to build a figure. So yeah, for me, with abstraction, it opens more to interpretation, and with color and stuff, how we all react differently to it and respond to it. But then with figuration, I always think about my brothers and sisters who aren't so into art, and how it's a bit easier for them to kind of enter this a painting in a way, because they see something, like something that they can recognize. So I always try to find a balance with that, and I feel like with mark making being like the emphasis and drawing being like these priority, it allowed me to kind of, you know, explore more with like use of color, line, and, you know, material, and it gives a bit more freedom to, you know, you can see the idea of it and how our brains work. You see figure, we'll sum it up as like, oh, these people in the line with grocery carts, but the way I approach it is the mark making that built them into, you know, for you to see like a figure. So I'm thinking more of the abstract and the mark making to create, I guess, figuration, to create figuration.
So Per Lines, you've used that title. This is the 12th show titled Per Lines. It's an important title for you. And you've used it for most of your exhibitions since 2016. I wanted to visualize it, to see like how it looked all together. But you've spoken about the sort of like this idea of like the effective magic of repetition, and I would like you to like speak a little bit to that and to what is Per Lines to you. It obviously also relates to the importance of drawing in your practice and line. There's a sense of like continuity also to that title, if you think of like a pearl necklace. But yes, let's talk about Per Lines.
Right. I mean, it just sounds really beautiful. Pearl lines. So, you know, and I knew, because drawing is the foundation to my practice, and I was so preachy in the beginning about drawing, I knew people would instantly kind of make that connection. So yeah, I really wanted to repeat it, because I also thought about how, you know, most artists that I've seen, you know, we have a show and we change the titles, and then, you know, each show is maybe a different thing, and then it's a different title to it. And I thought how interesting it would be to kind of repeat the title and exhaust this idea of a title, which then creates like a world. And it's not so much about this show was this particular thing. It's more like this is this world that you're allowing the audience to enter. So yeah, with Pearl Lines you know, not only does it sound beautiful and it plays to, you know, like the pearl and the lines and drawing, but just thinking about the line, and at that time and early on, it was like I was really into like the idea of the horizon line. And it reminded me of being out on sea, and then seeing just like nothing but the ocean, and then this line, and then when it was a storm, it would waver, and then when it was a nice sunset, it was just like, it looked so beautiful. So Pearl Lines for me connects to so many different things. It's like the personal, you know, my relationship to drawing, and then repetition is like when everyone else is like changing things up, and this is like the way things are done, and then that I repeat it a lot, it helps it stand out. So I knew that it would be distinctive in that way. And being an artist in New York, you got to find a lot of ways to be distinctive. You know, you got to be either weird in your work, look weird, talk weird. It's hard, man. It's a lot of talent.
We'll look anyways.
It's an amazing talent in New York. It's too much talent in New York. So I was always trying to find ways to help myself stand out. So yeah, that's kind of why I repeat it a lot. It's a very personal meaning for me. And I also was encouraged to do it even more because I remember the artist Jim Lambie. I think at the time I only repeated it like maybe once or twice. And then I told him in a studio visit that I was like, I'm going to just keep titling my shows Pearl Lines. And he said, man, that CV is going to look crazy. And now like seeing it, I'm like, yeah, he helped. Yeah, he gave me that. He's seen it already. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's good advice. But yeah, I guess I wanted to say, just like to backtrack a moment to that, when Walter was here a year and a week ago, was saying earlier, for a site visit, and we were taking a walk around the lake, we were going to dinner, and I said, Walter, I have a really great title idea for your show. And you were like, no, like the title, it's Paralines. So there were two like important things for Walter in the show, and one was the title. But on to color, and I think that is like the sort of like most immediate aspect when seeing a show of you or walking into your studio, of course, is your love of color, your fearless, joyful, bold approach to color. And there's so much that I think you have to say about color, the politics of color, the notion of color as a subject matter, and sort of like the different ways in which we all relate to color. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah. Early on, I would listen to a lot of Stanley Whitney's interviews and things, and I was very interested in how he talked about arriving at his practice and how he struggled to, figure it out. And he really helped me understand how powerful it is to use color as a subject matter, and how infinite it can be when you're exploring colors. And they're both intimidating, but once you get into it, it's a little push and pull, razzle dazzle. And most of the time, because color impacts us all so differently based on our experiences, it gives a lot more to the viewer, because we all react differently to color, and we all have different moments of, like seeing a painting that's very colorful. You can just have certain moments of that painting that you really love because of the color combinations. So I thought it's very important to kind of explore color in that way. And also, maybe I really wanted to dive into it because it's like being a painter, it's such a happy thing to do. And like playing and paint, it's almost like you stay young forever. Being a painter for in particular, because you like plan and paint. So I think that it urged me even more to not be intimidated by it, because it feels so good, or in the experience of it can be so joyous, or it can make you feel, you can kind of dictate a feeling a little bit by using color. You can, blue can make people feel sad, but for me, blue is not sad. It feels, it's relaxing. It's meditative. It reminds me of being out at sea and how small I felt and how powerful the ocean felt, and how you kind of just like think about life a lot. So yeah, color is just like a thing where you can use it in very streets. It looked like I copied his color palette. It's crazy. It's so crazy. Every time I see that, I'm like, wow. But that's how it goes when we both. I mean, he's been way before me, so he's like an encyclopedia for like color combinations. So of course I'll look like I'm close to him. But yeah, it definitely helped me think about how to approach color and how to use color in a both conceptual way, and how to you can be like very political in a sneaky way with color as a Black artist. So I like to play with that a little bit.
So the objects, your paintings are very colorful, very bright. They sort of like welcome us in, and there's sort of like a group of objects that we can see them across. There's sofas, there's bricks, there's brick walls, there's hats, figures wearing hats, cars, stars. What else? A lot. But these are some of like the sort of like the psychological objects, the recognizable motifs. So
flags are like broken up in it, like sneakily in it. With objects, the sofa or the armchair, because at first maybe it was more of a sofa, but now it's kind of like an armchair. It's weird, but I decided to use that as a motif, because to make it to the Navy and to come from the South and to even come to New York, I listened to a lot of motivational speeches by this guy, Eric E.T. Thomas, and he talked about this thing of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I listened to that like repeatedly every day, and it kind of was something that I kept telling myself to be able to at least, come to the big city or even to go to the military. So it's very important. In the way I also thought that an armchair, even though it's a symbol to remind me of that phrase that he says, which is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. I know that when you place that in a setting, we all relate to armchairs or couches differently, or even when you're thinking about the interior, because of how we are all raised, it kind of takes your mind into a different space. So I knew that although it had this meaning for me, in a way it was like a self-portrait for myself. I knew that when I painted, it wouldn't really express that so much. It wouldn't feel like so much about me, because it'll take each individual's mind in a different place based on what they experienced. So that was a very important one. And I also wanted to repeat those a lot of objects a lot, because I feel like my style in the paintings kind of shifts sometimes, or I'll work in series and the paintings could possibly feel different. So I needed something to connect them. So repeating certain motifs and objects was a good way for me to do that. I painted the hats because when I first got to New York, I had to walk through a Hasidic Jewish neighborhood, and they wore those type of hats, and I was so new to that, and it was very interesting how I had to learn to accept how the kids seemed like they were afraid of me. So it was something that I had to understand, like the reasoning why and all that stuff. So I kind of wanted to do the hats as a way to think about what Hasidic Jewish people had in common with what I like black people, because I grew up in the church. So hats were like a very popular thing. Like the church ladies always wore big, nice hats and stuff. So that was my way of turning something that felt negative and hurt my feelings into something like the common factor that was more of a positive. So yeah, the hats came from that. And what else I repeat? I repeat stars. The stars are, they have so much political energy in them that I don't have to really speak to that, because putting stars or even stripes in a work, it just brings to mind the political. So I kind of like to play fishing with what people would, assume and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, we're gonna move through titles because we don't have a lot of time left. But yes, no, maybe you want to say a few words about titles. Your titles are oftentimes also incredibly poetic. We're talking about giving you viewers an entry point, and I think that your titles can both sort of like give access, but also like complicate what is happening. But how do you approach that? And maybe we can talk particularly about this work here too.
Okay. Yes. So. I guess I never really accepted the idea to title a painting in a way to help someone enter the painting, because I didn't feel like that was necessary. Because me personally, when I look at paintings of other painters, I don't need their title to help me enter the painting. I really just appreciate experiencing their paintings. So with me, I think looking at a painting and then reading the title, I see them as two different bodies of work in a way. So I kind of like the idea of what a beautiful word or a beautiful sentence could do for you also with looking at a painting. So I like that, how that works. And this painting in particular, with I don't want to make somebody else, I want to make myself. It comes from the book Sula by Toni Morrison. And it was a moment where Sula was kind of being pressured to have babies, and she made that statement like, I don't want to make somebody else, I want to make myself. And I thought it was very beautiful, because it reminded me of growing up in the South, where that is a lot of pressure, and you hear that a lot, as you get older, like making babies, and everybody is not prepared to make babies. So I like that, but I also thought about what it feels like as a painter, a young painter or a contemporary painter with such a rich history of painting, and how intimidating that can be, and how the paintings, your painting can maybe look like someone else's painting, and that it's so much of the attachment, and so it's so difficult to find your own voice in a way because it's so many great painters before you. So I like that it kind of speaks to that, because that's what I'm always in search of and always trying to strive for, to be very distinctive and be Walter Price rather than this artist or that artist. Even some of my favorite artists, maybe I'll pull something from them, but I really want to have more of myself, because we all are influenced, but it's kind of really hard to find your own voice. And I take a lot of pride in that, because again, I think it was that military thing of being in uniform and having to just fall in line. You have to shave the same, you have to wear the same uniform. And that really got to me, to the point where even in my military career, I read the rule book about your hair, and I learned that you can have your hair 4 inches high. So I decided to get a high top fade just so I could kind of look different from everyone else. So I guess I've kind of always been rebellious and trying to be me. Maybe that's a little too much ego, but it made me feel much better to have that high top fade than so.
Let's talk about repetition, and then we'll talk about the painting, the walls black, and then we'll open it for the floor for questions. But yes, repetition is obviously also very important. We've spoken about the sort of like the kind of like the history or practice of like learning things through repetition, how the Navy and like the military sort of like cemented a bit of that, and we see in your work repetition of compositional elements, repetition of motifs, repetition of colors. So let's talk about that, and particularly in relationship to the pedestal ladies and the paintings from the Cadence series, particularly this first painting.
So with repetition, again, the military was a big influence on me, because we would have to practice fire drills every day, and doing it for so long, you take it for granted, or you get annoyed by it and you don't want to do it. But because we did that every day, when there was an actually live fire and we all were freaking out, I realized the importance of repetition and practice, because although my mind was telling me I want to run, I want to quit, I'm tired, I'm scared, I don't want to die, my body was literally fighting the fire. So I realized like it's a very important thing. And as a painter, I think repetition comes in a lot about like the idea of exhausting an idea. So it not only helps me give like it kind of put ideas in like a uniformity in a way by doing a series, but it also helped me push that idea as far as I can take it. So even thinking with figuration and abstraction, or being like trying to play in between, when I'm pushing the idea, it allows me to feel confident enough to seem a bit more figurative. And as I keep doing this same, strategy or the same system of them being on a pedestal in a way, I can get even more looser with it, or I can get more figurative with it, can get more abstract, because it's a series. So I think working in series helped me to exhaust the idea, push even more mark making, find new painterly moves, but it all connects in a way. So yeah, repetition is really important, not only to like push boundaries in a way, but also like exhausting ideas, and which a lot of times lead me to a new body of work, because although painterly moves that go into so many work, once you do maybe like 10 or 11, it for me it generates into a new idea, because I maybe have done a move like even how I did the water, the idea of the water, like so many different ways. For me, that can transition into more of an abstract painting with just like the swirly like waves or whatever. So it kind of like how my mind works is I'm very obsessive about painting. So once I have an idea, I kind of want to push it until it kind of takes me into another body of work. So yeah, it's like my system, my way of working.
So last thing that I think is obviously very distinctive, we could talk about small works. We can leave that for the reception. But environment, so like when Walter came for a site visit, we talked about the title. The title was non-negotiable, and the walls were were also kind of like we had to paint them like black, and that's important. And this is something that you've been doing also for quite some years, and I think that you've recently sort of like come to understand like the meaning of that, or like or what's sort of like some of the reasoning behind that.
Right. So yeah, I think the first time I painted walls one color was at the Modern Institute, and it was because that I learned that the space was like a former bathhouse, and then I also knew that people were already aware of my naval experience, so I kind of didn't want to play into that too much, but I also love blue, and I know blue would kind of be connected to me anyway because of the naval experience. So I decided to paint the walls all blue in relation to them and what would be connected for me with people knowing my background. And I decided to put blue carpet in this space, and for mainly one reason is because that I was told that the people in Glasgow can be very like mean, or just like honest, I guess. Like they'll be blunt with you. Like they don't like your work. They'll say I don't like your work to your face. And I heard that a New York artist was told to his face like they didn't like his paintings. So I thought to myself, oh man, what can I do to make these people relax a little bit? Because I'm pretty confident in what I do, but I don't want nobody to come to my face and tell me they don't like my painting. I don't want that. So I always thought about how I felt growing up of coming to someone's house with carpet and how relaxing it is, how you want to take off your shoes in a respectful way. So I thought to myself, why don't I put carpet in here? Because if they step on the carpet, it's softer, they'll relax. Maybe they'll be nicer to me. So it began from there, and then I started to push it more. And with the black walls, it always reminds me of like the mind, and when you try to meditate and how your mind, you just want to be all over the place and distracts you, and you can see that as images in a way, like, oh, I need to go to the mall or go check my mail. That's a visual, so I think about my paintings in these spaces on a black wall as like this visual of like when you have your eyes closed and your mind is trying to distract you in this way. So that's for black. And then a lot of times I'm responding to the space. So even with the brown walls, I decided to do that because it's in London and it was so cold there in January. So I knew that brown would warm it up. And I also wanted to use a brown that was close to my own skin complexion, because in a way the show was like a self-portrait. So I was like, why don't I explore this brown? And because for me, London feels so white, but not like white people, but just like white. I wanted to have brown because I knew it would play into the political, race and all of this stuff. So again, like going fishing with how people would respond to things or assume, and also how challenging it would be for me to actually use a brown color, even though I am brown myself. So, yeah.
I think that on this note around also like being comfortable, and it's a good place to maybe open the floor for questions, if there's anyone.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you guys, but especially for sharing like your philosophy. I thought we'd be learning about art, but this is like a whole sort of life approach, which is so great. Like the Navy, what a cool sort of lateral move that like you were able to utilize in your practice. I wanted to ask you about one specific thing that I saw on the show that maybe speaks to that, which was it got uncomfortable immediately, and how you chose to, I don't know whether it was the spark to add that in, the window or the handle. It could be so many things, but having that other dimension into it, like why did you add that? Like, it seems like that spark could have been, in anything. Why was that important to this piece?
Right. You saying like the collage photo that I put in, or?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Weirdly, because a lot of time in my smaller work, I would put like this figure looking into the work. I don't know if you noticed that, and maybe the more white paintings that are on the wall, it's like this like person looking into it, and they have like a little hot top fade, which was like myself. I didn't never want to reveal that, but like me. But it also looked like Grace Jones or somebody too, like her silhouette. Right, you know what I mean? So I guess being in my own world a little bit too much, I thought, okay, because I normally would put that at the bottom corner as if it's looking into the space. I decided, as if everyone else would know, I was like, well, why don't I put a drawing of mine at that corner in a way as this figure kind of looking into the space. So I was thinking a little bit too into my own world. But also, I do like how it look, and to collage like your own drawing, a frame drawing on a wood panel. Come on, like you don't really see that like that, you know. So it's also like doing something that's like it's probably so wrong that it feels right. So you know, so that's New York again, man. It really makes you jump off the ledge. Yeah, I'm so obsessed with painting and like mark making and just very obsessed with painting. So a lot of times it's intuitive a little bit. But as I'm making, like even with the if we can go to the figures real quick, of like the pedestal ladies, is like I'm making them from the bottom up a lot. So it's almost like each moment in a painting, as I'm like area that I'm making a painting, even though it's like a figure, I'm being captivated by each moment. So each moment is like allowing me to kind of like I'm reacting to each moment. So even the foot, I like how the foot look. I like how it doesn't necessarily make sense, but I like how it looks. So it's all these quick moments of being like, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. I like that. And that's kind of how I build the painting. And I always feel like the idea of unfinished is silly because mostly it may be coming from someone who isn't a painter or artist, because when the artist stops, it is finished, you know. So yeah. Hopefully that's good. I can kind of ramble about it. But.
No, this is somewhat insider. I had the privilege of going to your studio, Walter, and one of the things, the question is about sports, and it's not knowing sports is a subject matter, you know, and you're a fan, you're a ball player, but I was captivated by, and I didn't ask you any questions about it, but it stuck with me. You were watching a particular boxing match, and you would watch, but it was an old fight, and so it wasn't like, you know, what's the outcome? But it was an analysis of the fight, but you would watch the fight, like the repetition thing. And I didn't ask about it at the time, but I kept thinking about, you know, was there something methodological about that you were transferring into a way of working, right? So you talked about play, making a painting is playing, a kind of playing. But there was something about this boxing match that made me think that there was something else you were extracting from this match, the way that the two boxers were approaching each other, and you were transferring it, or at least this is my reading of it, into a way of working. Like this was, you know, I mean, almost like the kind of hackneyed quote from Hemingway, you know, I wake up every morning and I confront the white bull that is the page with no words on it, you know, like a skirmish or something with the painting. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about perhaps sports and the transfer, what inside of sports maybe that you transfer into a way of working.
Right. So when I was in the Navy, I had my shipmate who I served my whole Navy career with. His dream when he got out was to be in the MMA. So he was like boxing and fighting, and of course I was the artist. So of course he got a little bit more into art, and I got into boxing. So he took me to the gym, and I was quick, so I thought could be a good boxer, and then I had a little sparring match. And I realized the next day, waking up with those headaches, that I'm not a boxer. So in my studio, watching those videos, I decided to bring a projector in my studio because, again, being so obsessed, I normally wouldn't have any type of distraction in there because I wanted to get into flow state and the zone as quickly as possible and just, let time pass by and make paintings. So I decided, a few years ago that I needed to find ways to distract myself to see what happens with the paintings. So I decided to put those videos in and to watch things while I'm painting, because now when you're waiting for an area of the painting to dry, you get caught up into watching a video or a boxing match, and now you done wasted a lot of time. So I kind of used it as a way to distract myself, work against myself to slow me down. And with boxing in particular, I used to be so against it after getting beat up. And then also seeing my favorite boxer at New York lose and seeing him get beat up so bad, I was just like, I'm done with boxing. It's bad. It's a bad sport. It's dang, But then I recommitted to it because I met a new friend through basketball that was an amateur boxer. So learning about it and thinking about it and how you turn a punch and how, footwork and all the discipline it takes and how these guys are like even when I sparred this guy years ago, I'm fighting at that time I was fighting at 130 pounds. So this guy was 130, but he was coming from like 160 to 130. So he was strong. And I was just 130, So it was like learning how they had to dehydrate their bodies, and they fighting basically dehydrated and performing for 12 rounds, 36 minutes. So it's just something about it where I always thought about like the history of boxing and paintings and all the great paintings of boxers. And, David Hammond has used boxing as a good subject matter. And I got to a point where I was like, I need to try to find a way where, I want to try to make a body of work about boxing, but not in a way that, has been done before. But how can I do that? So it's a lot to do with watching them fight, practicing myself, and doing those movements and maybe it'll take me from a few years, but trying to find a way to translate that into a body of work. So maybe it'll be me punching the canvas or something. I don't know, but I'm trying to figure it out. But I had to watch it. I had to obsess over boxing. So now I've really committed myself to boxing and just watching it, studying it, and learning it, practicing myself, and talking with my friend a lot about his experiences because he's coming up in the ranks as an amateur boxer. So yeah, it's almost like I try to find ways to absorb myself, and then maybe it'll just kind of bleed into the work in a way where it's very natural and organic. But it may take me some time with that because it's been great boxing paintings and just the way artists have used boxing is really great. Like even with David Hammons, I feel like he done basketball so great that I can't mess with it. Even though I know I'm pretty good at basketball, I got pretty good. I can't mess with it. But boxing, I think it's a little room there for me to kind of wiggle in, be a part of the crowd. Thank you for asking that.
I think that's a great place to end.
Wait, can I ask?
Yeah. Jay.
You talked about repeated use of certain symbols in your work. Your earlier works, a lot of them had letters. You were using letters a lot, and they weren't really fully formed words, but it seems like you're using that less and less in the works. And I'm curious, what was the significance of it early on, and why have you seemingly moved away from it?
Right. I think I moved away from it, but I'll always return to it, like in my work. I kind of always, it's like this circular thing that's been happening that I'm noticing. So when I was using like letters in the work, it was mostly to I was thinking a lot about negative space. So like revealing like the underpainting. Like, so if I use a blue and then paint a red over that, sometimes I just want to show some of that blue. So instead of just leaving it like it's just a shape, I wanted to use a letter because I know, again, fishing, people could try to read into that. Why did he use that letter? Or, what does that mean? So I was playing a lot with that. So I guess I kind of ventured more into learning more about how the brain works, and that when you cut off text, it'll pull people in more to try to decipher it, because that's how our brain works, and we're really challenged to figure things out. So I kind of moved from the letter to the sentence, but the sentence was cut in half, to kind of still have that pull. So I guess I moved away from it temporarily, because there's a few more symbols that I moved away from, like even like that pole, and then like the snake on the pole. I kind of have moved away, but I always find myself coming back, and I'll probably come back better than I was, so a little smarter maybe.
I think there's a great place to end. Megan will introduce our resident chefs who have cooked some foods in response to Walter's work.
It's true. Thank you, Walter and Rosario, for your generosity in this conversation. I also want to thank Abby, our ASL interpreter, for joining us on the stage, and I thank all of you for gathering this evening to celebrate this work and exhibition. As Rosario said, my name is Megan Leafblad, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Engagement here at the Walker. We want to continue this conversation, but we're going to do so in a little bit more convivial manner. So my colleagues and I want to invite you to the Cargill Lounge for a reception, a chance to see the work, if you haven't yet, it's beautiful, and to eat and drink with us. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we hear from one of the key folks in hosting this convivial time, Chef Gustavo Romero. As you exit, the Cargill Lounge is going to be, you're going to go at the back of the cinema, you're going to take a left. You can either take the stairs or there is a small elevator. You'll go up to the Cargill Lounge. It happens to be right off the Burnett Gallery where you can go and see the show and wander through Pearl Line's Walker Art Center 2024. If you received one of these tickets coming in, you'll want to take that with you. If you didn't, if you had a digital ticket, you're going to want to get one from our usher on the way out. This is going to let us host a drink for you. So take one at the top or find yours if you had one. And we are also very lucky to have small bites provided by Chef Gustavo and his team. I'll let Chef talk a little bit about their menu and their work. But if you haven't experienced Gustavo and Kate's food and hospitality, you're in for a treat this evening. Chef Gustavo Romero hails from Hidalgo, Mexico. He's cooked his way from San Francisco to Miami with a multi-year stop in Georgia that he may share a little bit more about. He and his family are now cooking and grinding in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He and his wife, Kate Romero, own Nixta Tortilla and Oro by Nixta, which was a recent James Beard finalist for Best New Restaurant in the country. Their mission is to both evangelize the ancient process of nixtamalization and to bring glory to the heirloom Mexican corn. One dish, one dinner, one amazing pack of tortillas at a time. If you haven't been to the restaurant, I encourage you to go, get on the wait list. They recently opened their patio, and their spaces are full of emerging and established Latino artists. Every wall in the restaurant is filled, even the bathroom. So I'm going to let Gustavo share a little bit about what you'll be able to taste in the reception tonight.
Ooh. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. This is my first time here. I recently just came to the museum for the first time, and I had the opportunity to talk with Walker the other day when we came and checked the space, and I'm sure you agree with me how inspiring just listen to him talk it is, and we kind of talk about Georgia for a little bit, and as he was talking about his time in the Navy, and we're talking about Georgia, it kind of made me think about my beginnings and where I started cooking and how difficult it was at times. So thank you for that talk. And at the same time, being from Georgia, I kind of went back into like what I used to cook because that's what I learned how to cook, or what I started learning how to cook. And Southern food, it was like that's what you eat. So we have a little play in some of these dishes. We have a little pork belly with some grits and a tomato jam. We have my play on sweet potato souffle. There was one of the classics there. We put it in a little jicama taco. And then the other one is a little tostada that we made, or house-made requesón, which they have a lot of cheese in the south, and it is delicious. And then Georgia peaches, because they're in season, they're amazing. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for being here and for how inspiring you are. Appreciate it.